It is time for some information. I know that a couple videos back I talked about some new things that we're going to be doing in our ministry, that we're stepping away from preaching ministry at the Auburn Church of Christ to do something that we call Backyard Church. And I want to explain a little bit about what Backyard Church is truly all about and some of the reasons that we're convinced that this is the next thing that God really wants for us to do. So I've been getting emails, I've been getting messages, I've been getting texts just asking, what is this all about? Can you tell me more about it? What does it look like? What do you do? What is the training? Just on and on it goes. And I want to explain some of that. This is something that God has been putting on our hearts for some time now. And we finally just launched out, talked to our elders, offered a resignation as of October 15th from the preaching ministry at the Auburn Church of Christ. I want you all to know a couple things about that situation because there's misinformation that flies around anytime that you don't give enough information. People just begin making things up and talking about it as if it's true. So the first thing is this. Our leaving Auburn Church of Christ, completely my call. I brought that to the attention of the elders. I'd been praying, fasting, talking to people, trying to discern what was best for some time, and finally landed on the fact that God was convicting us that it was time to launch out and to start something new, to take some risks, to step out in faith into some big unknowns, things that we didn't have all the answers to, and yet we felt compelled that God had given us a vision for some new things that we needed to be doing to make disciples, to plant churches, to be equipping the saints for the ministry of the church and not just have a professionalized class of ministers. It's really time to put our money where our mouth is, and we talk about these things a lot on wineskins, but it's really important that we actually act and move on these things that God is convicting us about. We can't just talk about solutions. We have to live into the solutions that we're most convicted about. With Auburn Church of Christ, I offered my resignation. I didn't get fired. It wasn't messy. It was a beautiful conversation. The elders prayed for me. I prayed for them. We're seeing this eye to eye. The church is moving forward in their own way. I'm moving forward in my own way. It's a healthy departure. We're very happy for that because we've always left on good terms with any church we've ever been a part of. And I've heard people say, well, I heard that you got let go in some kind of nasty way. That's not true at all. That's not what happened. So if you've heard that or you think that, that's just not true. Second myth that I've heard is that we're drawing off a bunch of members from Auburn Church of Christ. We have not tried to get up a launch team from Auburn Church of Christ. We've not gotten 50 people or 100 people, whatever people to start this new church. Really what we're doing is we have just a core nucleus of families who are helping us. A lot of them are from our neighborhood who are a part of this effort to start something new, to reach the lost, to make disciples who make disciples, to plant a network of house churches. We are not going around soliciting a bunch of help from Auburn Church of Christ members. I really feel like my own personal philosophy of ministry is like the Hippocratic Oath for ministers, do no harm. So I'm not leaving Auburn Church of Christ to harm Auburn Church of Christ. We've been praying for the leadership, for the elders by name. We've been praying for the success of this church. People who have come to us and talked to us about it, we've encouraged them to go back to Auburn Church of Christ, to consider that their church home. I've also heard that people have said we're trying to draw off money from Auburn Church of Christ and from the membership. That's also not true. And, that would be a tempting thing to do, and it'd be maybe an easier way to get resources more quickly, but it would be the wrong thing to do. And we have been determined from the beginning to go about this process with complete integrity, even if it seemingly puts us in some kind of financial risk or jeopardy. We have to go about doing this the right thing. If we do this with integrity, God will bless our efforts. And so, no, we're not drawing off a bunch of members from Auburn Church of Christ. That's not what we're up to, and we're not drawing off a bunch of money. In fact, there have been people who have said, well, how can I help? Can I give? And we've said, look, we're not asking you to give anything that you would take from what you're given to Auburn Church of Christ, right? If you want to support, that's great, but please do not give less to Auburn Church of Christ to support our efforts, okay? I want you to know we're on the up and up with this. We're going about it with integrity. And again, I know I've not given a lot of information, and so in the lack of information, people just make up things as if they're fact. These things are not true, and I want to assure you of that. So what is true? What is Backyard Church, and what is it really all about? So we're about to launch our webpage. I wish that was up today. I could just point you right to it. It will be backyardchurch.org. We do have a Facebook group that we've started. We're executing on the vision that we believe God has given to us as He's convinced us over the last several months that it was time to act. Now, right before COVID hit back in February, my wife and I took a vacation, and we were trying to figure out what was next and if we still needed to be a part of this church and what were our next steps. And we were just really convinced that God was telling us to wait. But we were also not certain what we were supposed to do next. And so we came back to Auburn. We went to the Exponential Conference in Orlando about church planting, just to wrap our minds around what this might be all about. But we still weren't certain what God wanted us to do. When COVID hit, we were even more convinced that we were just supposed to stay put. Just stay safe. Be glad you have a job. Do your job. Do the ministry. Love on the people. And, just stay put. God was just saying, stay put. Don't make any changes right now. And then within a few months of COVID, as we decided, we really want to keep worshiping, as church kind of stopped in a sense. The meetings stopped on the physical address and the physical gatherings. We decided we got to keep worshiping. We want to worship with our neighbors. We want to worship with our friends. We want to worship with the people who are basically in our neighborhood. We've had a number of families coming to our backyard to worship. It's been very affirming, very life-giving. It's a place of participation. We're just a group of Christians in the backyard worshiping God, praising God together. We send out questions to our group in advance. We encourage participation. We encourage conversation. Man, woman, and child are welcome to share thoughts in backyard church on Sunday. We have just energetic worship, passionate worship. It is instrumental worship. We have a guitar that's played that on the Sundays that we worship. We have done an a cappella service, and we'll probably have some more a cappella services in the future. But, as I've come to understand instrumental music as a preference and a tradition, what's dawned on me in that is that a cappella worship can at times be a barrier to some people to hearing the gospel, to come and being a part, as they just sing out and all they're hearing is their own voice, that they may be a little bit scared by that or intimidated by that. And I don't want any tradition to get in the way of me carrying out the mission that Jesus put us on to make disciples of the nations. If there's any tradition or any preference that could get in the way of that, I'm not in favor of doing that just for the sake of the tradition or the preference, because God has called us to make disciples of the nations, to plant churches, and to equip the saints for the ministry of the church. Instead of having a professionalized class of priest ministers who go about doing the work for us, it's time for the everyday Christians to know how to minister, to know how to make disciples, to know how to lead worship, and we all just share together. I'll teach. My wife Missy does some teaching. Other people do some teaching. We have a brother from Uganda who is in the States who does some teaching. And we just share. It's just life on life, sharing together, taking communion together each week, praising God through just deeply meaningful songs. It's just about moved me to tears on several occasions. And our worship is moving. It's inspiring. It's encouraging as we're all just jumping in and participating. It's not over the top. It's not just a big band environment. I do have a problem with that because it becomes very entertainment oriented, and then people just stop singing and it's non-participatory, and I don't think that's a good route. That's not our route, okay? But here's how we see this going. We want to develop a network of house churches where just everyday Christians are able to take on the ministry of the church in their own homes, and right now in COVID, our own backyards. And so we're going to take in interns, people who will come and help us to see how we run backyard church, to see the logistics, to see what it takes, and in that time train them in leadership so that they can go back and facilitate this in other neighborhoods around Auburn. And as they do that, I'm going to bring them into leadership cohorts, of disciple-making cohorts for people from various neighborhoods who have an interest in starting this in their neighborhoods, so that they know how to go back and invite their neighbors in, their friends in, their coworkers in, to disciple-making cohorts, relationships where we'll work through disciple-making, simple, reproducible disciple-making methods. So we're growing a network of people who are also not just wanting to start backyard churches, but are praying for backyard church. And this is the number one foundational component of the whole thing, is we form a foundation of prayer. We've been praying about this for 9 months, all right, and fasting and praying for God to show us exactly what he wants us to do. We finally realized what that is. I'm explaining it in this video, and it all goes back to fasting and prayer. We formed a prayer team. We're going to be getting out information, prayer needs and requests to that, like say for right now, with our 501c3 being processed by the IRS, please pray that that is expedited. Please pray that that's not held up by anything. If it is held up by anything, I'm sure it's just some kind of exercise in faith that God is putting us through, as his timing is not always our timing, but we want to see that go through as quickly as possible so that people are more comfortable in giving donations. We're very comfortable with the application and what we send in, but we have no control over the length of the process. So there are things like that. There are things like God to send us leaders and us out into the community as we connect with people and find the people of peace in our community who are the networkers to the gatekeepers who can get us into more neighborhoods and into more locations. And I'm even praying that God will send us people who have already been trained. I was having a conversation with someone the other day who was having breakfast with a missionary who returned to the States, who's in a nearby town to Auburn, and is looking for what they need to do next. Here's someone who's already trained and experienced in ministry, who's put right literally in our backyard, who I don't even have to spend a lot of time training. God is going to provide even people who already have the experience and training. This is just awesome. I wish I could go through the stories of how many prayers God has answered. We're making a list of this. How many prayers God's answered, how many things that he has provided for us in the exact moment of need. There are just dozens and dozens and dozens of instances of this where God has given us exactly what we need. I was writing up the prospectus for Backyard Church so that people can wrap their minds around what we're doing. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's in California who works in the oil fields, and I said, hey, I'm writing this prospectus, and maybe you'd have some insight on how to make this better. And he said, well, that's crazy. I just took the Donald Miller Storyline course in writing business prospectuses. I would love to look at that. I said, are you kidding me? So he reorganized it, and we reworked it. I re-edited it, and then I thought, this is good, but it doesn't look as good as it should. I wish it looked better. And so I contacted Gorham, who's a friend of mine, and on our leadership couples within Backyard Church. And I said, Gorham, I know you're good with design. You have a good eye for things like that. Would you mind just giving this a better look? You know what he said to me? He said, I teach this kind of business prospectus design at Auburn University. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? You teach that? This is crazy. God's providing all this. I was going to engage and spend a whole bunch of money out of pocket for help with 501c3. And right the very week that I had to make a decision on that, someone came to me who is very experienced in nonprofits and said, I'm going to help you with 501c3 if you'd like. Seriously? And it's just been crazy like this, that God keeps putting people in our path. I mean, just even a simple story as simple as this past Sunday, our kids have activities to do that correspond with our lessons. We have a bag with each child's name on it. And when the worship starts, we hand the bag to each of the kids, and they have some activities to do to engage the content and the topic of that week's lesson. And so one of our other couples, Amy, was looking at this saying, our kids really need some clipboards. She was going to go buy some clipboards for them to work on there as they're sitting on their blankets, sitting in their camp chairs in our backyard at our house. And she thought, but I haven't prayed about this yet. Maybe I just, with all that's going on and all that God has answered, maybe it's just time for me to pray about this. So she asks God for some clipboards. And I kid you not, she's talking to another parent that afternoon who says, I noticed this morning in Backyard Church that the kids really need some clipboards. And I decided that my husband and I are going to go get the clipboards and bring those to you to put in their bags. It's crazy. I mean, there's so many stories like this. There's one I'm going to share in a separate video here coming up about something God did to me last Thursday that taught me just a huge lesson, an immediate answer to prayer that I just blew my mind and reaffirmed that God is in this. He's moving it. The church is being shaken. It's time for Christians to move. It's time to us engage in the mission. We've said we're the faithful church because we've engaged in 5 acts of worship, but never 2 at the same time. What about the Great Commission? Can we be a faithful church and not engage the Great Commission? Can we be a faithful church and not be making disciples who make disciples and planting churches? That's the church in Acts. Paul went around and established churches, and yet we say, okay, we're a faithful church, but we're not establishing churches. We're the church of Acts, but we're not establishing churches. We're the church in Acts, but we're not making disciples. This doesn't make any sense to me, and so I am devoting myself to this work and to this process to create, through the power of God and Lord willing, the help of God, if God will continue to bless this, a network of house churches beginning in Auburn, Alabama, and Lord willing, spreading outward to the dorms in Auburn, spreading outward to Opelika, spreading outward to Montgomery, outward to Birmingham, outward to Huntsville, outward to Florence, to the Muscle Shoals, outward to Columbus, Georgia, outward to Atlanta, down into Florida, people in Oklahoma, people in Utah, people all over the place. We've had these conversations and people are so curious and so interested. I'm going to begin laying out the components of what this looks like because God has brought my wife and I through some very intentional and purposeful training over the last 2 years that we had no idea why God was equipping us the way he was until it all clicked about a month or so ago when we knew this is what we had to do. I'm going to explain that. I'm going to lay it out. But Backyard Church, man, we gather together. All are welcome. We throw out our camp chairs. We maintain distance. We mask up before and after because we want to be respectful of people. We start with a welcome. We just encourage people. We're glad that they're there. We talk about prayer needs. We have a table that's set up with communion every week and a prayer basket with prayer cards. Those prayer requests then are going to go to our prayer team who are praying over the needs of Backyard Church. And after the welcome, we have an opening prayer, man, woman, or child. Anybody can come up and pray, followed by someone coming up and leading communion thoughts. Sometimes that's a man, sometimes it's a woman, sometimes it's a couple. Because we're in the backyard worshiping God, we're all invested, we are all involved, we are all engaged. When that's over, we sing several songs, again, instrumental. with a guitar, acoustic guitar. Sometimes we have one of our friends who's very talented with just a little bongo drum over in the corner, just keeping a very light beat going. And it's so life-giving. It's not just as instrumental music, okay? It's beautiful, okay? And when that's over, we give a lesson. Sometimes it's just me, sometimes it's Missy and I, sometimes it's other friends from the backyard. And when the lesson's over, we sing a bit more, and then we dismiss. We have time of fellowship, of catching up. And, we have people who come and set up communion. We have setup of a little bit of AV equipment and takedown. Very, very simple, very, very small. And I want to emphasize this. If you've made it with me this far through this video, this will not work if God's not behind it. This will not work if it's not bathed in prayer. This will not work if it's not simple and reproducible. If it's complicated, expensive, hard to do, needs lots of training, you need a seminary degree to pull it off, it will not multiply. So we are creating every single part of this with an eye for multiplication, an eye for reproducibility, an eye for replication, and making every single part of this simple, and then engaging people in the training that they need to have the skills that they need to make this work. And we can do this through Zoom all over the country and training this through cohorts. We can do this locally if you're local, but please, please pray for this ministry. And as we begin this, we have some financial needs that are going to be popping up and need for some support. Here's the plan. Our prayerful plan is to raise 2 years worth of support. That's partial support. My wife and I are taking some steps into being bivocational in this. I'm looking at Army Reserve chaplaincy. She is looking at some work with nonprofit here in Auburn, because we really believe that the budget of the church does not need to be so staff heavy. It needs to go out into mission and into the community. And so we're doing our part to be respectful of that and to allow more money to go out. And so we're not so dependent upon the giving of the church. I also want to let you know this. I'll explain more about this later. It's also really awkward to ask you to come to my backyard to pay my salary. We are never passing a hat in backyard church on Sunday morning to pay staff salaries or budgetary expenses. The only time we're going to pass anything to ask anybody for any kind of money are for specific needs in the community. We are having private conversations with people who are local participating and people who are in other states and other cities. Maybe you're interested in this, to come and talk and pray about this, and maybe pray. Everything is prayer of discernment. Does God want you to support this effort financially, through prayer, through encouragement, whatever it may be? That we are doing that on a private level. We're doing that through online giving. We've got a post office box to receive checks. That's how we're working that, because I feel a real conflict in saying, please come to my backyard so I'll pass a hat so that I can make my house payment. I think that's would be a sad place to be. And so we're trusting God that He is going to send the right people to us to make this work, because He has cookie crumbed us all the way up to this moment, and He is going to see us through every bit of the way. We have an amazing network of people here with wineskins and with our personal relationships and with churches we've been at in Florida and California and Tennessee and Alabama. And it's just a wonderful, beautiful thing. And I'm telling you, this is such a step of faith. I'm going to have to talk about how much faith God is building in us through this. I mean, even the timing of it wasn't really my choice, and I'm going to talk about that later, of when we announced and how we got 45 days with the church and all this. I mean, it's all right. It's exactly what God wanted. I think God instigated this. It wasn't my timeline. God put me on a tighter timeline than I really wanted, because if it had been on my timeline, it wouldn't have been faith, because I would have had every I dotted, every T crossed, 501c3 in the bag, and I would have said, now we're ready to go, and now we're ready to... That would have just been wrong, and it wouldn't have been of faith. And God is pressing us forward, and we are trusting in Him to take care of every single thing that we need. I love the fact that you're watching this. I love the fact you've made it 20 minutes. And, sometimes we put ads on our videos. We're not putting ads on this. This is not a money grab or anything from this particular video. I just want you to get the clear, uninterrupted explanation of Backyard Church so that you can understand where we're going, what we're doing. We will be talking about this some on the Wineskins channel, because Wineskins is not just a place for ideas. It's a place for movement. The old slogan was exploring the heart of restoration, but restoration is a movement. The new slogan is restoring a movement. We got to move. We can't... Thinking is not moving, okay? There is movement that happens as we think, but it's not real kingdom movement in the sense of souls are not reached because we thought hard about something, right? Disciples are not made because we thought hard about something. Churches are not planted because we had a paradigm shift on atonement. And those are wonderful conversations. They are needed conversations. They're building block conversations to much of what we're doing. But it's time for us to move and demonstrate movement and talk about movement and pray for success and celebrate what God's doing. We will continue to have the theological conversations because many of you are seeking and are looking for answers in that. But there's also going to be this new side to the conversation at wineskins.org, mattdabbs.com, and youtube.com/wineskins. If you want to follow along with this, please subscribe. If you want to be on the prayer team with this, please let me know in the comments or email me at matthewdabbs@hotmail.com. Text me at 334-750-9919. We'll get you on the prayer team. We'll send out prayer announcements periodically. And here's my dream with this is I want to be in a meeting with my leadership people where we run up against a tough decision and we can say, we must stop right here because we have no clarity. Let us send a message to our prayer team, ask them to pray right now that God would make this clear or tell us to wait, and we will get immediate prayers from 60, 70, 80, 100 people. I just mentioned this 2 evenings ago, like at 10 o'clock at night, and we got like 25 people overnight who said, add me to the prayer team. You've been added to the prayer team. Comment below. It will not work without prayer. It will not work without fasting and prayer, without submission to the Lord, without seeking His will and His guidance. It just won't work. Thank you for watching to this point. More explanation to come. I just want to be clear. I want to be concise. I'm encouraged. I'm inspired. I hope you are too. God is moving. He is shaking us up. And I'm not saying this is the solution for everyone, everywhere. I'm not saying this is the fix for church for COVID for the next 100 years. I'm just saying this is what God has called us to do. And it's exciting. It's inspiring. It's a little scary. More stories to come. Thanks for watching. God bless you. See you soon.